Welcome to the cockpit of the Sling TSI. This is a typical instrument panel layout for a Sling TSI, although since it's experimental, they can come in many different flavors, and some of the panels from Midwest panel builders have some great new features as well. But let's do a walk around the panel and look at some of the basic features. On the left side here, we have the open and close for the cabin vent and heater, and that's available here. And then just above that, we have the lane switches. This is lane A and lane B. These are the two individual lanes of the ECU, the engine ECU. The engine is controlled by a computer, just like modern cars. And so lane A and lane B would replace what would be left and right mag in a legacy airplane. Below that is the key starter. And if we follow the switch pattern downwards, we come to the ECU backup switch. What this switch does is it connects the engine computer and engine systems, fuel pumps, ignition, etc. directly to the battery. It's used during the pre-start checklist, and then it's used in an emergency if both of the two alternators fail in flight. Then switching this on connects all critical engine systems directly to the battery. Further along here we have the main fuel pump and the aux fuel pump. This engine has, the Rotax 915 IS engine has dual electric fuel pumps. So we fly with the main pump on all day long, and below about 2,000 feet AGL, we have the aux pump on as well. A little bit more to the right, we have the master switch. This excites the panel. And then further along here, we have the backup battery switch. This is the backup battery for the EFIS, and keeps the EFIS alive during a main power failure. And then here we have EFIS 1, EFIS 2, and EFIS 3 switches. EFIS 1 and 2 are the two G3X touches, which are the primary part of the display. The G3X touch obviously is a fantastic navigator with full engine monitoring, primary flight display, and navigation. And it interfaces with the GTN 650 deeply, which is very helpful during IFR flight. If we follow the switches along here, the next one is avionics, and avionics turns on the GTN 650 and the remote-mounted Garmin transponder and audio panel. Quite a few of the devices are mounted behind the panel and are controlled by the screen of the G3X touch, like the transponder is controlled directly from the screen. The next switch is the prop switch. We have an electric constant speed prop made by Airmaster in New Zealand in the Sling TSI, and so it needs electrical power to operate. The controller for the prop is at the top here. When it's in the auto mode, it has three settings that are primarily used in flight: takeoff, climb, and cruise. Cruise is 5,000 RPM in this setup. Climb is 5,500 RPM, which is maximum continuous power with the 915 IS engine. And then takeoff, which allows maximum RPM of 5,800 RPM and is used for up to 5 minutes at the start of a flight. If you would like to select any RPM besides 5,800, 5,500, or 5,000, you can select hold on the prop controller and then use this prop adjustment selector to dial the exact RPM that you want it to hold as a constant speed prop. Or if you switch the prop to manual mode, you can just set a fixed pitch for the prop to maintain, and it's not going to adjust for RPM at all. Coming back down to the switches here, the autopilot switch is the next switch. The autopilot has a dedicated controller. We've got heading bug selectors, altitude bug selectors right here, and you can select any of the lateral modes or vertical modes of the autopilot using this controller, as well as dial in like a desired VSI with this scroll wheel. So real intuitive to operate and real handy. And the combination of the EFIS, the G5, and the autopilot makes this aircraft a TAA, a technologically advanced aircraft, which means you can use it to meet the requirements for commercial rating. The next row of switches along the right side of the EFIS here are the light switches. We have the nav lights, the landing lights, the taxi lights, and the strobe. So these ones are very nicely organized, so you can find the light switches when you need them. And just to the right of this is the flap selector lever. We normally take off with flaps 1, which is about 10 degrees. And we normally land with flaps down, which is about 30 degrees. And you can see by the position of the flap selector, the position of the flaps, as well as the indication on the G3X Touch showing the flap position. And of course, you can always look out the window. The trim control for this airplane is on top of the stick, and it's trim down and trim up. And autopilot disconnect is also on the control stick. The trim is automatic when you have the autopilot engaged. So once the autopilot is engaged, it'll set the desired pitch trim in flight automatically. Above the autopilot controller is the GTN 650 COM, nav, and GPS IFR navigator. This allows this airplane to be an IFR machine, and you can fly an IMC with the Sling TSI. The integration with the GTN 650 and the G3X Touch is also fantastic and allows you to use the primary G3X Touch as a flight display in IFR. And of course, this is backed up by the G5, which has its own little included backup battery, and this provides all the primary flight information, and it will control the autopilot in the event of the G3X Touch failing. Further on to the right, we've got a pitot heat switch, and this airplane has extended tanks, and it has a transfer pump to pump from the extended tanks. And then down here is a row of circuit breakers, and across the bottom of the passenger EFIS are a row of circuit breakers, easy to access, easy to see. Then further to the right is our ELT controller, as well as the vent open and close for the fan and heater. Coming back to the middle of the cockpit, we have the heater controls and the cabin fan controller, and these are different in different models. This is how this one's set up. Below that we have the parachute activation handle. You can pull this handle in the event of an emergency, like a mid-air collision or an engine failure over unlandable terrain, and the whole airplane will come down with the parachute. Just below that we have the fuel selector. You can select the left or right tanks just by switching the selector. If you do need to turn off the fuel, you have to pull the little locking mechanism back, and it goes into the off detent. To get it out of there, you have to pull the little locking mechanism back again, and then you can easily switch between left and right. Moving further back, on the left side we have the throttle, full throttle and idle. And on the right side we have the standard handbrake. A little unusual for some people, but very easy to get used to. To stop, you pull back on the handbrake, and you can use one hand to manage both the throttle and the brake. If you are taxiing and you want to accelerate, you apply a little bit of throttle. If you want to slow down, you pull the throttle back, and if necessary, you pull back on the brake. To accelerate again, you release the brake and advance the throttle. So it is a simple one-handed operation and very easy to manage. The parking brake is engaged by pulling back on the brake lever and switching on the parking brake valve. And now the parking brake is set. And that's a basic tour of the Sling TSI instrument panel with all of the great bells and whistles that it has. Flight in VFR and IFR is approved, and lots of new modifications coming all the time, but that's the basic layout.